As you all have figured out, I am a professor here at Emory and was very fortunate to be invited by David to join in co-curating this exhibition. David has abundant experience curating exhibitions at the Getty, and it's been a real joy to work with David over the past, 4 or 5 years as we've been working on this. So we intentionally didn't plan a script for this afternoon, and so you may even get a little bit of what has been like for us to work together. I will say David has been a really wonderful collaborator and disciplined and generous, as well as gentle as well when you need to get your things in on time, Megan. So I'm really happy that we were able to organize this conversation with David.
It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. And as we'll talk about, this is an exhibition that's been many years in the making and rooted in collaboration, in partnership, and in conversation, of which this event is in a way a microcosm. I've used this line already, but so the show was previously at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles between April and July this year. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with visitors. And after the show closed at the end of July, I was starting to get withdrawal symptoms. And so actually having the chance this week to see everyone in the galleries, just now seeing it so busy, is really energizing and exciting. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations that will ensue here in Atlanta. What we thought we would do this afternoon is walk you through the exhibition in a way. I say many of you have already had a chance to look closely, and that's great. But we can sort of give you maybe some of our some of the ideas that shaped the exhibition, some of our highlight objects, some of the kind of talking points that we wanted to dig into, and then sort of spill out into a sort of a broader conversation. Very briefly, just to kind of orient you if you're sort of unfamiliar with what this show is about, we are bringing together the decorated ceramics of 3 distinct cultures. The Greeks in the Mediterranean between around 700 and 323 BCE, so what we call the Archaic and Classical periods. The Maya in Central America between 550 and 850 CE, what's called the Late Classic. And the Moche, a people or peoples in northern Peru between around 200 and 850 CE. So these are 3 cultures, as you see, scattered across the globe, very, very different time periods, different ways of organizing their societies, different religious beliefs, social structures, different narratives and stories. And as often sort of happened at this point when I was kind of giving tours at the Getty, people would ask, well, why are you doing a show about them? And the reason is, and was the sort of animating principle for the show, is that all 3 stand out for their production of decorated ceramics, terracotta vessels made for feasting, for drinking, gift giving, or offering to the dead, that are adorned with images of narrative, of complex scenes, of figures, of gods, of heroes. And it seemed really productive, and I hope you will find it so, to bring them into the same space and to see what conversations can ensue. So that is the sort of premise of the show. Megan, I don't know if there's anything more.
Yeah, and I'll just say that when we started working on the exhibition, and we knew we would have Greek and Maya for sure, so our respective specialties. And there were some of our advisors who said, only do the 2, right? Because then you can go deeper into each civilization. But we resisted that. One, because we didn't want just a one-to-one comparison. We were worried about implying any kind of hierarchies. And then we were just both so excited to have the Moche as well. So we pushed back on some very prominent advisors to our exhibition. And I'm really glad we did, because the Moche pieces are some of the most extraordinary in the exhibition and have been, I'm sure as we'll talk later, some of the surprises for a lot of our visitors and deserve to be known better. So, and then also gave us a lot more ways to sort of play the 3 off of each other and begin to think about how do we learn more about each one, asking questions that we may not have asked before because of what comes out of each one.
What we've done in this little presentation is sort of a mixture of a few gallery views, a few object views, a couple of glimpses of the show as it was at the Getty. I should be clear, the show is essentially the same at both venues. Megan and I worked really hard to ensure that, as best as we could, the same objects, the same content and structure applied across both exhibitions, although, as we'll talk about, there are some exciting additions for the installation here. But this is a view of the exhibition as it was at the Getty Villa earlier this year. And in organising this exhibition, in sort of wanting to kind of foster these juxtapositions, these conversations, and inviting audiences to explore similarities and differences, we've mingled the three fabrics throughout the show. So in every section of the show, there's Greek, Maya, and Moche together. So it's not a chronological layout, it's not a geographical one, it is more thematic. And the way that we articulated the exhibition was asking a series of questions, namely who, what, and how. So the who looks at the makers and the users, the people who produced these pots and who lived with them, who died with them. How looks at looks at the stories and images, the kind of core narratives that are depicted on some of these objects. And then the final section is the ways in which potters and painters took advantage of the shapes of these vessels in order to tell these stories. And this is where you get the opportunity to actually handle some of the replicas that we commissioned for the show.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we also were really cognizant about was to not tell the visitors exactly how to think about all of these and how to compare or contrast them. Like, we were very explicit about putting them together and giving some explanation, but then also encouraging our visitors to look themselves and think themselves and also ask questions of each other. And that's also one interesting thing to sort of think about. You know, we're not necessarily here to give all the answers, but we're here to pose some of the questions and see what comes out over the course of the exhibition. And I think this was your idea, to have those three simple questions, which I think is a really useful way to do it, because they're questions that we can all ask, right, about any kind of narrative, and it helps to think of the exhibition also just more about being human, right? Of telling stories, of gathering with people, engaging with people. And so as a way to also, so it's not so intimidating, right? That you don't have to know everything about the Trojan War. And I can't remember every single detail. I said, David, now that I have to give tour, do I have to read the Iliad again tonight? Yes. Right? He said, yes, you do, you know? And so by having it be about basic fundamentals of being human and telling stories, and then people can then look and see the unique differences, whether it's about style, whether it's about a particular social structure or image or text. And so that, I think, simplicity really helps it be more inviting to people.
And I think in organizing a show like this, in recognizing that, and again, maybe there is someone in this audience who can claim this, but I don't expect that visitors to this exhibition will be coming with an equivalent expertise about Moche, Maya, and Greek. Maybe visitors may be familiar with one or two, but sort of again, that kind of in some ways creates an even and sort of level playing field for all visitors, because there is going to be material in this show that is unusual, that isn't fresh. And that was kind of, I suppose, an abiding desire for this exhibition, of kind of presenting material that may be familiar, but in a way that is new and refreshing, and likewise material that may be unfamiliar, but in a way that is accessible, kind of looking at through a sort of shared structure. And I'll do another shameful plug for the book. In developing the publication, we invited our authors and ourselves to write, at that sort of introductory level. So the book has kind of chapters sort of introducing the Moche, introducing the Maya, introducing the Greeks, and so again provide visitors with a kind of a toolkit, if you will, for approaching this exhibition. this also fed into kind of organizing the layout of the show. And this is a photograph. This is the first section of the show, Makers and Users. This is a view of the first case as it was at the Getty. It's similar. You will see it just next door, slightly rearranged. Throughout this project, one of the things that kept me, well, there are many things that keep me up at night. One of the things was wanting to do justice. On the one hand, to be able to provide all of you with a way to see these objects side by side and to approach them, sort of see the similarities and present them, if you will, like literally on a level playing field. At the same time, not wanting to lose that cultural specificity, the particularities of Moche ritual practice or Maya royal feasts. And so sort of balancing that similar but different approach, so the similarities and the differences, and the way that Megan and I, working with our designers, sort of tried to thread that needle was organizing the first two galleries, whereby there is an initial vitrine where the three examples of the three are physically placed side by side in the sort of same space. And then around that vitrine, then there is more of a focus on the Greek, the Maya, and the Moche. So there is that opportunity to get a sort of general overview and then kind of dig a bit deeper into those three cultures. So that was a sort of an organizing principle. In this case in particular, I guess curatorially speaking, kind of ticks so many boxes, because one of the wonderful things about working with painted pottery of these three fabrics is that there are some instances where we see these vessels being used on the surfaces of the pots themselves. So they, I never like saying that these objects speak for themselves. They always invite conversation, but it's really kind of, I found it really effective to kind of display these three, where you see examples of vessels being used in their respective cultures, and we can maybe dig into the three of them. Unless there's anything else you want to...
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could go to the next one because I think actually having these objects with objects depicted on these vessels with vessels depicted on them also shows that it's not about, and this is a phrase that comes from one of your colleagues, that we don't want to think about vase painting, but about painted vases, right? So we may think about the images that are on them, we're thinking about the stories, but we really want to think of the artists who made them, the incredible forms that were made by hand or wheel or mold, and how they were used in social settings. And I think by showing them in these social settings, we can really begin the exhibition, also familiarizing them, right? We all go home and eat or drink with ceramic or other forms of vessels. So again, it's a way of us also maybe trying to put the visitor at ease as well, right? And just also to imagine them in use. Do you want to start with this one?
Sure. So this is a Moche flared bowl. You're seeing it from up above, and then there is a drawing on the right. And this is on loan from the British Museum. And we were thrilled. I mean, all of the objects we were thrilled to be able to secure the loan for. This one in particular, because it's this extraordinary representation of weavers at work. And do we have a pointer? Yeah, so you can point this out. So underneath the sort of roofed structure, you see a series of figures with backstrap looms tied around their waists that are sort of connected to the roof, and each of them is weaving. And you can see actually there are sort of fabric samplers hanging in the background, and the weavers are seemingly replicating these textile patterns. You can see also spindles depicted in the background, and each of these weavers is accompanied by a painted vessel, sort of hanging in the background, maybe sort of meant to be seen sort of, say, in relation to a wall or sort of in association with these figures. And at about, what are we saying, sort of 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, there are these scenes of exchange, sort of figures, maybe some sort of gift giving, some sort of transaction. One of the challenges and opportunities of the Moche material is we don't have, the Moche did not use writing. And so in terms of understanding the imagery, we have to draw upon the archaeology and the iconography, make judicious and careful use of later sources. But it seems that this is, I think it's fair to say, some sort of ceremonial or ritual production of textiles, given these sort of patterned garments that we're seeing potentially, would have been used by Moche elite, Moche rulers. And it gives a clue to at least some of the settings in which some of these ceramic vessels may have been seen and used.
And it's also so interesting that each one, and you probably can't see it from where you're sitting, but go and look very closely, that each of the vessels is painted differently, which is also, so there was an intention of the artist making this to show different designs. Most of the ones here, pretty much all of them, are more geometric designs, which appear in many Moche vessels, as opposed to the ones we chose for the exhibition, which has more of the pictorial narrative designs. But so here, this artist is showing the diversity of artistic design here, as well as pointing to another medium as well.
That was another sort of plus point for including this object. I mean, this is a show that is all about ceramics. Everything in the exhibition is terracotta. One reason is that terracotta lasts very well. All three of these cultures produced imagery in many media, whether that be in metal, on metalworking, on bone or ivory, fabric, textiles, wood, painted murals. So much of these other various materials have been lost, whether deliberately destroyed or through erosion and degraded. But this scene that shows weavers at work kind of nods to these other picture worlds, if you will, in other media that the ceramics were part of. Should we maybe jump to the Greek cup?
Yeah.
Again, the challenge that I had in giving tours of this show is I can ramble on and on about these plots for hours, which I apologize. But this is a symposium scene. The Greeks, sort of fundamental to Greek male elite practice was the symposium, which is an all-male get-together centered around wine. The Greeks thought it was desperately uncivilized to drink wine neat, so they always mix wine with water. And if you can point under the handle, you can see there is a big mixing bowl here, encircled with ivy. This is the big bowl in which wine and water would be mixed and then distributed to the participants of the symposium, who you see reclining on couches, enjoying one another's company, enjoying the company of women, singing songs, telling stories, holding drinking vessels. And this is a sort of really nice sort of evocation of all the kind of things that a symposium could and should be. It's kind of leisurely, it's relaxed, it's fun. There is, as I say, music, there is song. The figure, it's somewhat worn.
Oops, excuse me. I can maybe use a point here.
You can see, hopefully here, the surface is a little bit worn, but this was a figure who was being sick. You can see the woman who is holding his head is kind of looking back in disgust as he vomits into the bowl down below. But this is the kind of thing you could, I wouldn't say look forward to in a symposium, but it's the sort of, this is like your sort of bill of fare when you go to the theatre and your sort of programme of events. So this is a kind of a great sort of snapshot of what a symposium would entail. And you see these vessels being used in this setting. And this cup is also really great because it also has the signature of the potter. So the detail on the bottom right, under the handle, you can see incised is the potter's signature. It says Hieron Epoiasen. And Hieron we know to have been a potter in Athens in the early 5th century. Hieron seems to have worked very closely with a painter called Macron. And we have a good idea as to their working relationship and their career together. And these signatures are also one way in which we understand a little bit as to the mechanics of pottery production in ancient Athens. At the same time, it begs many, many questions. And, it's late on a Sunday afternoon, so embarking on a kind of Marxist reading of Greek pottery, I won't do. But, thinking about the ways in which, the potters, what they knew of their market, and likewise what these drinkers, these wealthy, aristocrats in ancient Athens, what they would have known of potters and painters who, at least if we understand from literary sources, were generally deemed to be fairly lowly figures, working in smoky, smelly pottery workshops, and that kind of those encounters between those who use these vessels and those who made them is sort of really interesting to explore. You sort of see it playing out on the surface of this cup, and that's a kind of a nice segue to the Maya vessel that is always, also in this case, where we have a painter's signature.
Yeah. So this particular vessel we were able to borrow from Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C., which is a really extraordinary one. So one, there is a painter's signature, but also the style of the painting with these incredible colors that the painter was able to achieve. We wanted to include this one for a number of reasons. One, because it shows vessels in use. So you have a ruler here seated on a platform, and then there are different kinds of ceramic vessels that are being used. So here, someone who is handing one to him. There's one under the throne. And then what's also really nice about these, and when you go into the exhibition, watch the where people are glancing, right? This is something we'll talk more about for the last room of the exhibition. But the glances between and across figures helps push the narrative forward or back again, or encourage you to turn the vessel. So here, you can see this interaction with people, but then he's looking to the side, and then we see, oh, there's actually another interaction taking place with people who are visiting him. And this most likely shows a visit to another royal kingdom, particularly of a young individual who's named as the owner of this particular vessel. But what's also wonderful is that it shows on what we might call the back of the vessel. So make sure you turn and go around the case to look at the back of the vessel, where you see these two figures looking at each other, right? And so seems like a separate scene. And this one is holding a cylinder vessel, just in the exact same shape as the one that it's painted on. And I love the way that his hands cup the vessel, so you can also sort of think about the tactility of holding it, how heavy it might have been, the way you'd hold them, and then also the conversation that takes place, right? And again, wanting to show these not as static images or static objects, but as living vessels that people would use to communicate and be in communion with one another in possibly an exciting environment. There's also ball game equipment that has been set onto the throne, perhaps brought as gifts. There's food in the scene, most likely chocolate, and I believe this one is named as a vessel for drinking chocolate. And so we get a hint just of this from this one painting, right, of this active scene of talking, drinking, eating, political engagement, elite visits within a palace setting, etc. Did you want to add anything else?
Only as you were speaking, Megan, it reminded me just in terms of another of our, I think it was almost sort of guiding principles in organizing the exhibition and working with the designers and laying it out. Mm-hmm. We really wanted to display as many objects as possible in the round. And you will see almost everything here is basically in its own vitrine, in its own case. As I say, we have a couple of these cases where the three are grouped together, but many of the other vessels in the show are shown by themselves so that you can walk around, so that you can get a full sense of the shape of the vessel, but also that kind of narrative possibility and the opportunity that they invite to rotate and to handle. And that in turn fed into just selecting objects. And actually we tried, it was really hard, but we tried as best we could not to have too many objects in the show. There was a real temptation, as you can tell, like so much of this material is so rich, so full of exciting material. But we really wanted to kind of narrow things down just to have a fairly small number of objects that then sort of allow it for visitors like yourselves to sort of really kind of look closely, and even just, being in the galleries this afternoon, sort of watching all of you, kind of being able to sort of really spend time patiently unpack some of this imagery as the painters intended. So this sort of trio that we've just shown you sort of sets up many of the themes of the exhibition in a way. The choices that the painters are making, the shapes of the vessels, what they're used for, and the kind of insight into how they were used. And elsewhere in this first section of the gallery, of the exhibition, we look at some of the individuals who may have used these vessels. And Megan and I tried as best we could to borrow objects whose fine spot we know for certain, because it really, that really allowed us to make concrete some of the assertions we were trying to make in thinking about how an individual might have existed, might have lived with some of these ceramics. And perhaps, again, in a list of favorites, this particular little Moche vessel we were staggered, I think, to be able to borrow this one. Really excited to include it in the show. This is so it's only, it's just nearly 11 centimeters. It's a tiny little vessel that shows a woman with a baby at her breast, and then a figure wearing a sort of spotted cape, laying a hand on the infant, maybe as a healer or a curer. And this incredibly touching scene, but rendered all the more potent because we know precisely where it came from. This was discovered at a site called El Brujo in northern Peru, and it was found in the tomb of a young woman who has been sort of nicknamed the Senora de Cal, the Lady of Cal. And this burial was incredibly lavish. As the archaeologists discovered this tomb, it was essentially embedded within one of the major Moche ceremonial centers. And I self-indulgently added just a couple of my little travel pictures. I had the chance to go to northern Peru in researching for the exhibition, and I show you on the left. This is the site of El Brujo, just to give you a sense of the Moche were a coastal people, and you see how the site is situated on the Peruvian coast. And then on the right is a photo of the grave itself at the bottom right, and also just showing you some of those painted murals that are extraordinarily preserved, and some of the similar patterns and figures that play out in the different media. Let's say, so this burial. I've got a question. So this vessel, it's hollow inside. We did when we were talking about how to display it. It is hollow inside. What it, if anything, it contained, we don't know. And actually, as far as I understand from the archaeological reports, it was actually found in the tomb upside down, which is, I'm not sure which raises even more questions. But it was one of a number of vessels that was buried with this young woman, who was found in, I think, 26 layers of textile wrapped. And within those layers of textile, abundant gold and silver jewelry, necklaces, nose rings, bracelets. She had 2 colossal gilded maces, a big gold headdress. This was someone who was really, really important at the site. And when the body was carefully unwrapped by the archaeologists, they discovered her body, which was covered with tattoos and many of the same sort of patterns that we see on the pottery and on the murals. As I say, this young woman was plainly really significant, really important at this site. And initially, it was thought that she may have died in childbirth. Study of her body suggested to archaeologists that she may have died either in childbirth or just after, which would make this scene particularly pertinent. From the conversations we've had with colleagues, it seems that may be a misreading of her body, and it may be that she wasn't necessarily pregnant, but it was maybe her status as a prominent figure, someone who was maybe in touch, able to communicate with the divine, with the gods, and communicate with humans, and maybe this figure of a healer was more important. And either way, this very distinctive, very sort of remarkable vignette seems to have been very pertinent to this individual who was buried with this vessel.
And also, let me just back up really quickly. So if you look at this vessel here with this spout and then the loop. That is a form of vessels that you'll see over and over again. That's a slightly different one, but it has been nicknamed the stirrup spout because it's like a stirrup on riding a horse, but that's not what it was for. Probably some kind of handle. So this is essentially a bottle, a very, very fancy bottle, but we don't know if it ever contained water or corn beer or another kind of liquid. But certainly given as an offering to the ancestor who was buried there. And just to acknowledge the Ministry of Culture in Peru and all of the archaeologists who helped us make this loan possible. These are very, very important part of the cultural heritage of Peru. And it was also really wonderful to have a Peruvian archaeologist come both to Los Angeles to the Getty and also here to Emory to install them and to get to know them a little bit more as well. Yeah, they can easily say no to us, right? You know, they want to keep them safe, right? And the generosity in lending us so many of their important pieces.
And in this particular case, in fact, the museum actually commissioned a replica of this piece. So it's if you visit the site, there is at least a version of this still on view in the museum at El Brujo is amazing if you get the chance to travel. Just talking again a little bit about what these things were for, what they contained. This is a Greek drinking cup that you'll see in the first gallery on loan from the Metropolitan. In many ways, very conventional as a cup for drinking wine. These big starry eyes that serve as a mask as you lift it up to your face. Imagery under the handles showing warriors fighting, which kind of plays in very nicely into what we might imagine, the sort of male setting of the symposium, the kind of ideals that were espoused and perpetuated there, and up in the middle, shown on the big picture, Menelaus leading Helen at the conclusion of the Trojan War. So again, kind of the opportunity to wax lyrical about the Greeks and the Trojans and the battle there. So all of this, everything about this cup is sort of seems to fit very nicely into this Greek symposium setting. But if you look closely, under the foot is written, incised in the surface, a Greek inscription that I've shown you a transliteration and a translation of up above, that records that this was the prize of a girl by the name of Melusa. She won this in a woolworking competition. So this cup, made in Athens, has been reportedly discovered in or near Taranto in southern Italy. So it was exported in antiquity and seems to have accrued or seems to have assumed an entirely different purpose in this new setting as a prize for a young girl. So just sort of nodding towards the mobility that these vessels have, that these things, as soon as, and this arguably for, any artistic practice up until today, once something leaves your studio, it can go on and have many other lives and sort of scope for interpretation and repurposing, and that is absolutely true for many of these vessels across all three cultures that could move either across time, across space, from person to person, in my world, from royal family to royal family, as items of gift giving and kind of assertions of status and connection. So these things are not only convenient containers for consuming whether wine or cacao or some sort of beer, but also could live on in many other ways. And again, this was one of many examples that we could have plucked from for that sort of little idea.
But it also, I could just say, like, that vessel, the one, so this one with Melusa's prize, the baby with the mother, and then there's another one or several others in the same room that were either owned by women or depict women. So even though, and this is something one of our advisors said, you need to make the exhibition as simple as possible. One idea, you're allowed one idea. And they're like, but there's so many to choose from, that's not fair. So I think the simplifying it to the who, what, and how but there's a lot more complexity stuck in there, right? That we hope that people, maybe visitors again and again, can visit. So just to say, on this Maya vessel, we see all men on this scene, but on the tiny Maya cup that's in the first room, we didn't bring a picture. It was actually owned by a young woman. And it says that in the inscription. And so we can also get a little bit of insight in this exhibition of the roles of women and gender, both having to do with men as well as women.
And that sort of feeds into like a question that sort of often come up as we've been talking about this show is, how did we choose the objects that we chose? And again, another kind of guiding principle was objects that allowed us to tell a number of different stories, that kind of getting, you buy one, get one free kind of offer, if you will. Allowing us, and you'll see in some of the cases, there are labels on the front and on the back that, present a number of different aspects. And so sort of selecting objects that allowed us to, nod to one idea, but also to introduce another. And so, really highlighting the richness that these objects can offer.
Yeah, and it also allowed us to organizing an international exhibition that goes over the course of almost a year. You don't get all the loans that you want, or you think that you have one and then it falls through for whatever reason. So having vessels that ticked several boxes, or that would allowed us to then reorganize them, or even thinking about size or shape to accentuate its particularities better. But even in a way, like most of these painted vessels do more than one thing as well. Yeah. Do you want me to start here?
Sure.
So the second part of the exhibition, and so I'll just say briefly, so at the Getty, there were 3 rooms, but at the Carlos, our architecture is a little different. So when you walk, so we have the first room, which is the Who, and then you walk across the bridge that connects the 2 buildings. And the last big room is where we have the second 2 sections. The How, which is the stories and images. And the What. I feel like I'm in a Who's on First sometimes, right? Bonk, right? So the What, with the stories and images, and then the How, the handling narrative. So those are all in the back room. And so here we were really challenged in choosing among many, many different, incredible, rich stories from each of the 3 civilizations, right? Where do we focus? And in the end, for the Moche, we'll go in detail. We focused on a character, a hero that has been nicknamed Wrinkle Face because of some wrinkles on his faces. We don't know what his ancient name or indigenous name was or is. So Wrinkle Face's adventures. And then for the Greek, who settled on the Trojan War, and for the Maya, we called the theme Maya divinities as forces of nature, and focused on several different divinities, primarily the Maya maize god and his rebirth, but also the hero twins, who are these wonderful hunters that appear in the Maya sacred text called the Popol Vuh, and then deities of lightning and storm, etc. And okay, to start with this one. So this is a piece that we borrowed from the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, that if you look at it from one side, you see this crouching hunter sort of holding a stick, right? With some birds, water birds around. But then if you're able to go all the way around the vessel or look at one of these rollout photographs by Justin Kerr, you'll see that there are actually blowguns. So they are weapons that were used in hunting. And you can see that out of the blowgun is a pellet. On this side, you can see that pellet moving still in the air, or on this side, hitting one of these birds. And so one thing that's wonderful about this one is it two versions of the same scene, like a before and after, shooting towards the bird, hitting the bird. But actually, if you look very closely, the hunters are different. They're wearing different headdresses. The birds are different. And so the artist is really playing with this portrayal of time. They are two different ones, but they're also similar. And these two figures are similar to the twins that we call the hero twins from the sacred text, the Popol Vuh, that was written down in the 16th century in Highland, Guatemala, that tell the adventures of these two twins who use their blowguns to shoot the false sun, which is a very fancy macaw that's wearing lots of jewels, to shoot it out of a tree, which then allows the real sun to be born. This is an incredibly important sacred story to Maya people, ancient to contemporary. And here are those twins, right? It's not exactly the same as that particular story, but there are these twin figures who are using their blowguns to shoot birds. So using this vessel as a way to think about past and present, continuity of stories, and then also variations of stories as well. That just as when stories are retold through voice, right? You tell it maybe slightly differently in oral history each time. These visual artists are also changing them and playing with the medium as well. So anything you wanted to add?
Only that I say this first case that we showed that these three are gathered together, even before you get into the specific narratives, we title this case Narrative Moments. And each of these vessels, Greek, Maya, and Moche, even if you don't know precisely who's who, whether you can't quite identify Wrinkleface or Ajax, you will see there is stuff happening on these pots. There is lively action, and that presupposes something happening prior to that. And then there are consequences to these actions. Similarly, say with the birth or rebirth of the maize god, these single images carry with them, like in a rucksack, all of their other associations. And again, this was a sort of an idea behind the sort of title of the exhibition, Picture Worlds. This network of ideas, of individuals, of figures, narrative episodes that are sort of connected to these specific images, that seeing an object such as this one, this dish, another of the Maya vessels in the show, that sort of invite that discussion, that these are almost sort of springboards to conversation that invite the users and hopefully all of you to kind of discourse, to digress, to talk about, in this case, the sort of incredible potency, vibrancy of the maize god in this case. And this plate in particular is really nice as well. You have the two other divinities on either side sort of pointing, almost serving as kind of spectators, guiding us as viewers to this kind of iconic moment of the birth of the maize god. And again, this is a dish that would have been used presumably for eating tamales. So as you eat your maize-based food, out of this, you reveal the maize god and bring him to life.
Yeah, and it's at what moment of this important story is told by the painter. And in the scenes of the rebirth of the maize god are actually, I don't want to say common, but frequent in Maya ceramics as well as murals. And sometimes you'll have multiple episodes of the narrative, but this actual rebirth here where he is emerging from a skull, which is probably supposed to be a seed in water from the underworld, is often chosen as the iconic moment to celebrate his resurrection. And he's dancing. Right?
Another kind of theme, sort of thread that sort of shaped, I guess, research for this show and the selection of objects is the relationship between images and textual sources. And Megan mentioned the Popol Vuh, which was written down centuries after the Maya vessels were made, but arguably may preserve some of the stories that were in circulation over centuries. So even though we may not have for the Maya, we know there were plenty of texts written on bark paper at the time that the vessels were made, but almost all of those have been lost either through degradation in the jungle environment or because they were deliberately destroyed by the Spanish. We have some later sources that we can judiciously use to interpret some of the imagery. And it's been really interesting for me to sort of think about that alongside the Greek material, where in some cases we have some of the ancient texts that were in circulation at a time when some of the Greek pots were made. And this is the earliest Greek vase in the show, dating to the end of the 7th century, early 6th century BCE. At a time when the Iliad and the Odyssey are sort of taking their written form, and this scene is I'm going to try and cut myself short because there's so much to say about this extraordinary plate. But you have two warriors fighting over the body of a third lying on the ground. This is a very, very regular, dare I say, generic image, and there is nothing, if you look closely, necessarily about the figures that identifies them. There's nothing to really pin down what is going on. This is a fairly regular scene of two warriors fighting over a third, with all of the kind of heroic ideals that sort of play into that. But if you look closely, and I encourage you to go and do so in the galleries, but hopefully the pointer will work, you'll see just in front of the helmets of the warriors and just above the shield of the third are inscriptions labeling the names of the figures. So we have Hector and Menelaus fighting over the body of Euphorbus. And that instantly, just through the addition of these three names, pins this down to a very specific mythological episode. And you go and consult your well-thumbed copy of the Iliad, and you turn to book 17, and you do indeed see that Menelaus and Hector fight over the body of Euphorbus. So this is, not just a general scene of warriors fighting, but a very particular episode of the Trojan War. Thing is, if you take the time to read your Iliad and go line by line, you'll actually see that Hector and Menelaus don't actually come face to face like this. Menelaus sees Hector coming across the battlefield and scarpers, and so they never actually come face to face. And when this plate was discovered in the 19th century, at the time it kind of caused people to scratch their heads, because people wondered, what was the painter thinking? Did the painter make a mistake? Did the painter know the Homeric story? Did they, were they confused? Is this some other kind of version? And to sort of pull out a thread from this, I think it happens less so today, but it's still, within recent generations that scholars often approached Greek art expecting the painters to be true to the literary sources, expecting them to be true to the texts. And when they weren't, they thought, well, maybe the painter was confused, maybe the painter made a mistake. And one of the things that I think I've found particularly enriching working on this project with the Maya material and the Moche too is recognizing the autonomy of the painters, that these are stories that were in circulation primarily orally, spoken, sung, passed down maybe from grandparent to grandchild. And there are certain, fixed things that, always happen. Theseus always defeats the Minotaur. The maize god is always reborn. But storytellers of all stripes have the capacity to spin these yarns in their own way. And I think this is what we're seeing on some of these vessels. And again, turning to the Moche, where, we don't have written texts, to how we begin to approach imagery without these sources. And that's been sort of really, I found really challenging, but really exciting to sort of see how we interpret a scene such as this.
Yeah. And here, and by the way, we're probably yammering on too long, so we should, but this is, I think, a great transition where we see in this scene, which is in the second room, here is our friend Wrinkleface, who is delivering some shells from the sea, some Strombish shells, to this divinity in a little house or temple. Notice, by the way, there is a stirrup spout vessel in front of him. And this particular scene, of course, there's a lot going on too, including a llama that's in the back. But this particular scene of the offering of strumbus shells, it appears in, did you include it? No, we didn't. It appears in these other vessels amidst many other different scenes as well. So here, this is one scene, but other episodes that are put together on these vessels in these incredibly beautiful, creative, complex ways where you can barely even figure out what is going on in the scene. So where is the strumbus shell offering is over here, whereas there's so much else going on in these scenes, and scholars can begin to trace the relationships of these episodes to each other. And essentially what is going on is that this hero, wrinkle-faced, one of the things he seems to have to do is to go underwater and battle various entities, including an anthropomorphic sea urchin and a dogfish and all sorts of other creatures, to get these shells and then come back and to Earth, and also help the sun be born through that emergence as well. So similar to the Maya, and also for the Greek too, we have a lot of going into the underworld, rebirth happening.
Yeah. And this sort of takes us to the final gallery, and we'll maybe open up for questions in a moment, but this is the sort of how section, so the ways in which painters took advantage of the shape of these vessels as a medium for storytelling. And as you see here, we've given you all the various different views as well as the rollout to give you a sense that this is something that was meant to be, it needed to be lifted up. It's painted on the underside. There's a warrior duck underneath, and you'll see another warrior duck shortly. But the whole surface is covered with this imagery. And then you've got this tube running through the middle and a little frog in relief perched above. This is something that was, invited that sort of tactile, immersive experience. And this is something we explore in the final gallery. And this is, again, for all of the wild variety between Maya, Moche, and Greek, and the shapes and the different stories. But the Greek vase painters are taking advantage of shape in the same way, showing figures repeated across the surface of the vessel. In this particular case, similar scenes on the inside and the outside. Again, this sort of constant back and forth. And likewise, some of the Maya vessels too, where in this case, the scene I've shown you a rollout here, where the entire surface is decorated. And again, you are invited to rotate this pot and in order to unfurl this narrative of the emergence of the very first cacao tree. And in rotating this vessel, you will also perhaps shake it and discover that the 3 feet on which it stands contain little pellets that rattle when sounded, all of which fed into another idea Meg and I were really kind of keen to push for. This is, as it appeared at the Getty installation, you'll see it here at the end of the exhibition, is a touchables table for visitors to be able to handle replicas of 3 of the vessels in the show, so that all of you can get at least some sense of what it would be like to manipulate and to experience some of these painted pots. I think we should we've filled our hour.
Yes, we even wrote questions for each other, but I think we incorporated some of those in our conversation here. Are there any questions, Katie? Or we can continue just chatting.
Oh, could you talk about the warrior duck? That one, it appeared, but that one in particular, the black one, is just incredible with the inlay and quite different from the other mochi pieces.
Well, yeah, I think this may be a lot of people's favorites, and on some days it's my favorite. I go back and forth. But here, this is in our case on sculptural vessels, and one of the things maybe our exhibition emphasize the narrative, the painted narrative, but actually many, many Moche vessels are sculptural vessels, right? Whether it is a face of an individual at different times in their lives. And so here, this warrior duck is certainly part of a larger narrative, right? And so it is a one scene, right, within a larger one. And it's an example of what we see among the Moche as well, of animals that become anthropomorphized, or plants that are like the bean warriors that are holding little weapons and running across the surface of the vessel, or objects like a metate for grinding corn that act up. So it's these animals or plants or objects that come to life. This was found at Huaca de la Luna, right? In another burial, and the mother of pearl inlay is certainly to make it a more luxurious item as well. But I think it also, like, as unique as it seems, it's also fits so much of what we know about the personality of, in a way, of Moche artists and artistic creativity, of also just being able to tell a story through just one image, right? They have these incredibly complex images, but then also so much is held within that piece of just imagining, like, who is this duck fighting? What's going on? Did you want to say anything more about?
No, I mean, one of the joys of this exhibition is sort of constantly learning new things, and the opportunities, when the show was at the Getty, to kind of hear visitors' responses. And actually, one of our colleagues, Una Holmquist, who is the director of the Larco Museum, which again you should visit, but she kind of threw out this idea or suggestion that you have this mother of pearl inlay on the black surface, maybe evoking stars of the night sky and sort of constellations. And so again, thinking in terms of narrative, not only looking to literary textual sources, but other celestial frameworks of storytelling, which I found, again, that's just a germ of an idea, something I'd love to dig deeper into.
Sure. Well, which also could be interesting because of the emphasis on the blackness and the shiny blackness in the Inca civilization of Peru. It's the black part of the sky where the constellations are. So I wonder if that is the case, then that may be something here. But also, I think the reference to metal, too, is extremely important. The Moche were extraordinary, in addition to being extraordinary potters, they're extraordinary metal workers, and the shininess of this black vessel with those inlays also reminds me of Moche metal work with inlays of other stones or other metals.
Thank you so much, Megan and David.